Good evening, ladies. I really like the name of this one online group I found called Sheologians, but since they've taken that, I've decided we're going to be the Shareans. Anyway, I'm going to kind of look forward just so my neck doesn't get cranked, but I wanted to just make a quick video sharing some thoughts, and I'll probably make a series of videos on this topic just as I have my thoughts come up. I was thinking to like actually compile a whole bunch of scriptures and have everything really organized and try to be more scholarly about it, but I actually think that um, one, it's a lot more work. Two, it doesn't just kind of flow from my heart, and yeah, I just think that I just want to share my heart with you. So I wanted to talk about kind of like a bird's eye view on the gospel, like what that is. And it's actually very robust. And I think the gospel is very simple, but I think as we grow in our knowledge, um, you can start to see how robust it is. So there's a lot of depth there. So I wanted to read Galatians 1, verses 6 and 7. And it says, this is Paul, obviously. It says, I marvel that you are turning away so soon from him who called you in the grace of Christ to a different gospel, which is not another. But there are some who trouble you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ. And then Paul goes on in Galatians to, Galatians, I'd say 3:10 forward, he starts to really hammer on contrasting Sarah and Hagar. Now, in Torah observing groups, they will, some of them will try to say that Galatians is about the law given at Sinai versus an oral law. And I honestly think that's pretty disingenuous with the text. Like, it just doesn't fit with the text. It's not at all what they're talking about. So that's not what they're talking about. And I'm going to also hammer on the other side too, because I think in churches we also have another problem going on. So, what I'm going to kind of propose is that there are both kind of the Torah observant and the church's stance on this topic are kind of simultaneously correct. Because I think there's two things going on. And in Galatians 15, where Paul says, first the natural, then the spiritual, and he says Adam comes from the earth, earthy, and he's a living soul, I think is how it's, and then it says that Christ is a life-giving spirit, okay? And we all know that in John 3, it says that we must be born again, or more technically born from above, because when we are first born, we're born in the natural, and then we are born, if we are born, in the spiritual when that comes. And so in Matthew 5:17 and forward, where Christ says, don't think that I've come to abolish the law and the prophets. I haven't come to abolish, but to fulfill. And he says, not one jot nor tittle will pass from them until heaven and earth pass. Actually, he says, not one jot nor tittle will pass from the law, specifically, not the prophets at that point, unless heaven and earth pass. Now, people will say, well, look up, the heaven and earth are there. So every jot and tittle is in full force. Okay, so the idea here, I'm just going to take a little rabbit trail, is that heaven and earth are covenantal terms, and the old covenant, you can pick this up in preterist teaching. Preter is Latin for past, so there's a spectrum of beliefs in preterism from partial to full preterist that believes more prophecy has been fulfilled than what's kind of commonly understood. And the idea is that heaven and earth were the witnesses of the Sinai covenant or the Deuteronomy covenant before they entered the land. And those are for the, well, some people would say that's all wrapped up. Actually, that's what preterists would say, it's all wrapped up. But what I'm kind of submitting here is that when we're born in the natural, we're born under a natural heaven and earth. So that covenant will, in a sense, always be here, because the purpose of the law, it says, was to stop every mouth, right? It shows us our sin, and we all stand condemned before God because none of us could keep it. And especially now, I mean, in Galatians 3:10 forward, where it says, cursed is he who puts himself under the book of the law to do all of it. I mean, if we're talking when they said we will be careful to do everything that is written, it's an impossibility for us now to do that because of what was required in that covenant. So the purpose of that law is to show us our sin and to condemn us. And Paul talks about it as the tutor or the schoolmaster that brings us to Christ. And there's a number of proof texts here. You could go to, it says the law and prophets were until John, and then the kingdom of God or heaven would be preached, and men were pressing into it. Or it says that the lawgiver would be between Judah's feet until Shiloh comes. Or it says, there's that other one in Galatians 3:2 where it talks about the seed, until the seed, the law was given because of transgression until the seed would come. So some people would say, see, it's all wrapped up. But the thing is the law still has a purpose. And like I said, because it says, don't think that I didn't come to abolish, but to fulfill, which he did. And then it says, not a jot nor tittle will pass until heaven and earth pass. And I do believe naturally that is still, and this is where I'm going to kind of come against I don't really agree with either side on this, because I believe that both covenants, just how, like, we wouldn't say the New Testament or the New Covenant, the law and prophets were until John, and then now the New Covenant has started. And before that, nobody had the gospel, right? Because we know that Abraham, it says that the gospel was preached to him beforehand, right? And so we can see that the gospel was before it came into place. So what's happening is there's a corporate story happening linearly, and it's representing a personal salvation story that happens inside the heart of every man. He's born in the natural, he has to come through the natural, and then be born of the Spirit. And so those are always at play. And you can see through the temple and through the feasts, which I'll probably try to do some sort of object lesson with some props or something to kind of illustrate the plan of salvation through those, because they're explicit demonstrations of how this works. So this is where you get to where Peter says Paul's hard to understand, because, you know, some people will say, you know, he's got a split tongue, almost like he's a serpent, right? He's talking out both sides of his mouth, because you'll have him speaking kind of in favor of the law and then not in favor of the law. And you have, let's call it churchianity and Torah observant people kind of at war with each other on this. And because he'll say the law is good if used lawfully, and then he contrasts the spirit of the law with the letter of the law. And that is really, you know, there's a lot of good teachings I could think of, or I could direct you, because people go directly, all meticulously through all the covenants and show you all the details. But quickly proof texting things like Jeremiah, where it says, you know, the law will be put in our hearts, right? And in 2 Corinthians 3, where it contrasts the tablets of stone to the tablets of the heart. And so this is where you see it's kind of like those shadows meeting their realities, right? So that this is that gospel, which is not another. Okay. And it's interesting because you have people in the Torah observant crowd who are trying to enforce the letter of the law, and they don't see the parts of that law that were shadows that meet their reality, like us being the temple, like the priesthood. We're the priesthood. Christ is the high priest. Natural Jerusalem, heavenly Jerusalem. They can't see the shadows meeting their realities. But then on the other hand, in Romans 8:7 forward, where it talks about the carnal mind is at enmity with God's law, and it can't please God because it won't submit to God's law. And so you have kind of churchianity on the other side that can't see the goodness of God's law, the spirit of God's law. And so, okay, I'm going to leave it there for tonight. And I hope you're tracking with me and that you'll come back for part 2 or part 1. Maybe this was just an introduction. And you can comment and we can get some conversation going. And yeah, I'm going to finish with the verse that he who wants to worship me must worship in spirit and in truth. Spirit and truth. Good night.